Games of Note.
Hi there, this is Wayne from the Games of Note podcast. Will and I are taking a short break for the summer, but what we did want to do, however, is have this, which is what we're calling a side note, a shorter episode where we focus on maybe a particular genre or a particular theme. This particular side note is all about games that were affected by 9/11. So yeah, not the most happiest of subjects, but we thought it was interesting nonetheless. So we'd love to hear your feedback as always. Have a good summer break, everyone.
Games of Note.
Welcome to Side Note. This is our shorter weekly podcast from the people that bring you Games of Note. And we are going to be talking about games history stories. My name is Will.
And I'm Wayne.
And today we are talking about what, Wayne?
These are games that may have been completed or that were in development, that will have been postponed due to kind of forces outside of their control.
Yeah. So I think this is we're thinking about making this a series, and this is going to be the first part in that, Wayne.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I think all of these ones actually relate to a specific event.
These all relate to titles that were affected by 9/11, the terrorist attacks. And so, yeah, some really interesting stories behind their delay or cancellation. So, should we get into it?
Let's start.
Let's kick off with the most obvious title, which was Microsoft Flight Simulator 2002. Obviously a flight simulator game. And with 9/11 happening a month earlier, this prompted the developers to actually delay the game, only by a couple of weeks, interestingly. But they ended up removing the Twin Towers of the game, obviously, before it launched. They also went back and patched Microsoft Simulator 2000 and removed the Twin Towers from that game too. What was supposed to be a really interesting new feature at the time, visual damage, that was also removed. And so prior to the 2002 version, if you crashed, it just simply would say crashed. However, this new feature was supposed to have like visual damage, and that was obviously removed due to various sensitivities. One of the other things that I thought was actually quite interesting that I found out was that thanks to kind of like poor reporting, the early FBI reports mentioned or claimed that the terrorist practiced in commercial flight simulators. So these are FAA, which is Federal Aviation Administration certified training centers. These aren't Microsoft Flight Simulator games. However, the media kind of took the word or the term commercial flight simulators and assumed that meant Microsoft Flight Simulators. But the damage was done, and a number of local news stations were kind of recreating the actual terrorist attack using Microsoft Flight Simulator, which then further kind of pushed that particular message and story. And this actually had a really detrimental effect for the flight simulator community. So VATSIM, which is the Virtual Air Traffic Simulator Network, they had to put out a statement kind of obviously condemning people from recreating the scenarios as they saw that local news stations were doing. And then AVSIM, which is like a aviation convention, which was supposed to be held in October 2001. They ended up cancelling that, but they also gave the FBI access to its servers just in case the terrorists use any information about the particular flights to train for the attacks. So yeah, quite obviously devastating for the wider community too. And obviously a lot of retailers ended up pulling the title. So UK retailers such as HMV and Woolworths, which no longer exists, they also pulled the game from store shelves, which is, you know, it doesn't sound like a big deal now, but if you've got to remember back in 2001, majority of PC games were being sold in physical stores. They weren't being sold digitally. So that's the first one. Any thoughts on this?
I think obviously the sensitivity around not being able to recreate the event, I think this is going to come up in the next title as well. If I remember correctly, one of the 9/11 survivors recreated the attacks inside of Second Life as a kind of visual art piece, and so I think it talks a lot towards the way in which games are treated as being simulators or training grounds for atrocities, right? And it comes up in games frequently, from Doom through to, you wouldn't expect it, but in this instance, Microsoft's Flight Simulator, and so that reaction seems very reactionary, right? It seems very knee jerk for it to be pulled from the shelves. But I obviously understand like Microsoft not wanting people to be able to recreate the attacks and taking out crash damage and taking out the towers. Yeah, makes total sense. So obviously, what did happen is that Microsoft Flight Sim survived, and it went on, and it continued to flourish. That is not true of the next game that I'm going to talk about, which is Propeller Arena. So this was a game which was due in 2001 for the Dreamcast, and it's from your boy Yu Suzuki, who we talk about a lot and we definitely love. And it was basically a dogfighter, so you fought in planes, set in the year 2045. It was a Dreamcast exclusive. It was also online, and it was shown at E3 in May 2001. It was playable just 3 months before the attacks. And now this is where things got a little bit muddy, so I couldn't really work out when it actually got cancelled. It sounded like maybe it got delayed, and then... But according to Wikipedia, it says it was due to be released on the 19th of September, which is 8 days after the attacks. This cannot possibly be true. The link for the source there went off to a website which just had background images of cows, like desktop images of cows. So I don't know what's happened, but it can have been possible because there would have been copies printed out and they would have ended up in retailers 8 days prior to the release date. Almost certainly it would have been, it would have been in warehouses. It would have been everywhere. So I think it actually got officially cancelled in October 2001. And what happened is that there is a level in it called Tower City, and it is very much New York-like, and you can crash into towers in it. So Sega obviously cancelled it. It was right at the end of the Dreamcast. It was at the point where the Dreamcast had already been pretty much decided to be cancelled, discontinued. So the game never actually saw commercial release. It never got printed onto discs. However, it did get leaked. And so a few years back, the full complete version of the game ended up being available online, and you can get hold of that through means that are nefarious, semi-nefarious. I guess it's your... what happens when it's something like lost media? I don't know. There's some real muddiness. But it is available on ROM sites. And the game, should I have played it, is very, very good. It's very Crazy Taxi-like. Have you played it, Wayne?
I've not, and I've seen some gameplay of it, and it does look fun, right? I mean, it's... Do you know who the developer behind it is? Because it's produced by Yu Suzuki. Is it an AM2 game?
Unsure. Not too sure. And I think also at that point, hadn't AM2 sort of been disbanded and they'd all got renamed? Maybe. So unsure who the developer was. But it's very Crazy Taxi-like in the sense of, even though this was an online multiplayer game, it had a series of challenges, and those things are still available. So the online part, as far as I know, there aren't any fan servers. That's never been played. But the sort of offline challenges are the things that you can play and are still enjoyable and good. Like I say, very Crazy Taxi-like. Who was the developer? It was AM2 was Crazy Taxi?
So it was Sega AM2, actually. Okay. So it was directed by Makoto Osaki, whose name I don't recognise. However, you're right in produced by Yu Suzuki, as you said, and I also wonder, because you also mentioned about it being similar to Crazy Taxi, which was created by Hitmaker.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is that right? I wonder if there are individuals from that team who worked on this.
It's also got that kind of pop punk soundtrack to it as well. A real shame that it never saw the light of day. Also, it was very strange in that it felt like an arcade title, but wasn't an arcade title. It was intended to be an online exclusive for Dreamcast. I suspect we will never see that series revived, and it's sort of, for many years it was a piece of lost media, but fortunately it has been recovered.
Well, there's that. And let's move on to the next game, which is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, which is a bizarre one to be on this list. It's not about flying at all.
It did come out.
But it did come out. So this was a game that was developed by Neversoft. So it was the third one in the series. It came out in 2001. They so happened to have a level that was set in an airport. And the original version of it was supposed to include like terrorists of some kind. One of the developers is quoted in saying, "When 9/11 happened, we're almost finished with Pro Skater 3. We had an airport level where the goal was to stop terrorists bombing the plane. We had to scramble and change it to stopping pickpockets." What's interesting about this is you can actually still see this in some of the animation. People did some deep diving, and in the original game files it still references some of the kind of the characters and those pickpockets individuals as terrorist_A. And actually, if you look at video, and I was able to find a video of this, if you look at gameplay, as you are kind of skating towards these individuals who are in a group, you can still see the animation of them about to press a detonator. So it's really fascinating to watch because it's clearly still that animation and not someone attempting to pickpocket. So yeah, obviously very different to some of the earlier titles, but I guess they were very sensitive of the entire situation at that time, so they decided to make that change. And then the last one we'll just talk about briefly is a interesting title called Metal Wolf Chaos. So this is a game that was developed by From Software, so everyone knows them now for Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring. This was originally an exclusive to Xbox and was launching in 2004, so this is a good 3 years after the 9/11 attacks. Now, I have to give the premise of this game because I think it's crazy. So you play, don't forget this is in 2004, this game was created. You play as the 47th president of the United States, and called Michael Wilson. And he decides to pilot a mech to stop a rebellion that was led by the vice president, which is called Richard Hawke. So like a very tongue-in-cheek premise for a video game. President piloting mechs for some reason. But yeah, as I mentioned, this was actually released in Japan in 2004 with the plan for it to then sell globally. But they felt that due to the political climate, the Iraq War was actually happening at that point in 2003. Prior, they decided they actually would cancel the worldwide release. They focused on it being a Japan-only original Xbox title. Now, I personally remember going to places like Super Potato and various other video game stores trying to find this title, and I couldn't. But thanks to the folks at Devolver Digital, they ended up re-releasing this relatively recently across all platforms, and it was renamed Metal Wolf Chaos XD. So yeah, did you get a chance to play Metal Wolf Chaos at all?
So I have not played any of the From Software mecha titles. I'm not really very familiar with them. Have you played them much, Wayne?
Yes, I've played some of they made a Gundam game called Gundam Unicorn that was a Japan-only mech title. So that's the only mech title I've played from them. They are probably more well known for the Armored Core series, so that's probably their biggest mech series that's known in the West. But yeah, that's kind of my history in terms of that series. And I own Metal Wolf Chaos XD now digitally. I played it a little bit, but yeah, not played too much. So Spider-Man to Enter the Electro, that came out in 2001. This was the second game in that then PS1 era Spider-Man games that was published by Activision. The final level of this was actually set on top of the Twin Towers. So if you actually look at the footage and the gameplay of it, what they've done is instead of allowing you to swing between two towers, it's just this one big kind of area, so they connected the two towers. So that's a slight alteration. Project Gotham Racing, that was by Bizarre Creations, and you and I will know them obviously from creating MSR on the Dreamcast. So they launched Project Gotham Racing as a Xbox exclusive series back in 2001. The original cover of the game actually had the Twin Towers in the background. And so they kind of, before release, they were able to put out a new cover. However, it is said that there are some copies in the wild that still have the original cover, so I imagine they go for quite a bit. Half-Life 2 did also had a sequence where an airplane was crashing into a building, and they removed that as well. This was in 2004, so again, this is probably more sensitive to the Iraq War. And yeah, that's it.
So those are the games that have been impacted by September the 11th and also some of the ensuing wars. Unfortunately, some of those games we got, some of them we got in edited form, and there are more. I think I hinted at as we spoke, and I think we'll probably do a part 2 on this one.